In American politics, one of the terms that we use really often is red state, blue state, or we refer to, well, that state is this community, this county is red and this county is blue. If you're a Republican, you probably have red gear. Do you have a hat that says Make America Great Again? It's probably in red. I haven't seen it in blue. If someone has it in blue, you better keep it because it might be a collector's item. For Democrats, if you have a Harrison Waltz sign in your yard, it's probably blue. It's not going to be red. That would be confusing because if it was red, that's Republican, right? So then why? No, it has to be blue. But here's what I learned this week. The party colors that we so often associate with these two political groups is not only recent, it is also something that sort of arbitrarily came about because of different decisions in the media. So how did this all happen? How did we suddenly start these associations if the political parties themselves didn't make that call? How did it come about? It turns out there were certain calls made in the media that started us down that road. But at the beginning, the Republicans were associated with blue and the Democrats were associated with red. Why did that happen? There's a man by the name of Roy Weltzel. He worked for NBC in the 1970s. And part of this change that happened because news moved from being in black and white to being in color, not just on broadcast news, but also when it comes to the newspaper, which is going to become a big deal in just a moment when we talk a little bit about some later elections. But in the 1970s, mid-1970s, NBC starts using this light up board. They're like, we're going to do something crazy. We're going to use a light up board for the election, right? Doesn't sound as crazy anymore because that's all we do all the time. But this was new for NBC. And so they had to make a decision. Well, what colors are we going to use? And so Roy Weltzel was running elections for NBC at the time. And he did this actually for several elections after this. But for the very first one where they had to make a decision, this is what he said. Without giving it a second thought, we said blue for conservatives because that's what the parliamentary system in London is. Red for the more liberal party. And that settled it. We just did it. Y'all, they just did it. That's just it. That's what they did. And actually, that's more or less sort of what it stayed. Things started to change around the years of 2000. So we get through the 1980s and now we're getting into the 1990s. And there seems to be somewhat of a coalescing all of a sudden of different colors that are being used by different networks. And we're getting more towards what we're seeing now, which Republicans are red and Democrats are blue. But at the beginning of what's important to know in those few decades is that there was kind of a mismatch. Some networks were using one color, and other networks were using other colors. Sometimes there was a yellow thrown in, sometimes there was a pink thrown in. It wasn't totally uniform. It started to get more uniform though, as we're getting now to what we would say is, more like the modern technology that we're using. And here's something else that the Smithsonian points out. Newspapers, thinking about this time back in the area, late 1990s, 2000s, were largely black and white. But 2 days after voters went to the polls in 2000, both the New York Times and USA Today published their first color-coded county-by-county maps, detailing the showdown between Al Gore and George W. Bush. Both papers used red for the Republican, Bush, and blue for the Democrat, Gore. Why? Here's the quote. I just decided red begins with R. Republican begins with R. It was a more natural association, said Archie C., senior graphics editor for The Times. There wasn't much discussion about it. You guys, there wasn't much discussion about it. What we're using now, red for Republicans and blue for Democrats, there wasn't much discussion about it at all. It just started happening. And then everybody, these different news organizations started to fall in line. And so again, a reminder of the power of the media to not only affect what we see, but the words that we're using. Let me just finish up here. Benjamin Gross is a sociology and criminology professor in New York. And he told CNN had a great article about this topic that I'm going to link, that he looked at the term red state and blue state and its use between 2003 and 2007. And he concluded that readers may develop negative stereotypes of their fellow Americans based on the development of stereotypical red state or blue state behaviors and beliefs. Gross said that the terms may fail to reflect the range of opinions that exist simultaneously within states, neighborhoods, and even individuals. After all, if issues are neither black nor white, voters themselves are rarely entirely red or blue. I like that line because I thought, is it fair to look at a state and be like, it's all red? Look at another state, it's all blue. It's like you start looking at these as absolutes and not looking at the nuances of these stories, the stories of the people, the stories of the state. And so, in an effort to try to simplify the American political process, was this actually a mistake? Was this actually a really big mistake? Because it's framing our stories differently now. And maybe the colors aren't that good for us.